I'm a 27-year-old man, and I find myself here because I genuinely can't figure out how to make sense of what recently unfolded with my family. For the past few days, I've been stuck replaying it all in my mind, questioning if I'm the unreasonable one or if the situation is as troubling as it feels. After reading countless similar stories, I decided to share mine. Maybe someone will understand. To set the stage, my family dynamic has always been somewhat unbalanced. I have a younger sister, Lisa, who is 23. Growing up, it was pretty obvious who the favorite was. While I was expected to be responsible and self-sufficient early on, Lisa always seemed to get a free pass. It was never explicitly stated, but the favoritism showed in small ways. Who got in trouble for missing curfew, who received extra dessert, or who had their mistakes forgiven. I convinced myself it was normal. After all, every family has its quirks, right? Fast forward to now. I had a 28th birthday coming up. My expectations weren't high. I would have been happy with a simple family dinner or even a thoughtful phone call. But a few days before my birthday, my mom mentioned in passing that they wouldn't be doing anything for me this year. She explained that money was tight and they needed to focus on priorities. I told her not to worry, assuring her it wasn't a big deal. I'm not a child anymore. I don't need gifts to feel valued. I tried to be understanding. Sometimes life happens. When my birthday arrived, it was as uneventful as I had anticipated. I received a generic card in the mail with "Love, Mom and Dad" scribbled inside. The family group chat lit up briefly with a few half-hearted birthday messages, mostly from distant relatives. My parents didn't even bother to call. I brushed it off, thinking they might have been busy. It didn't feel worth turning into an issue. A couple of days later, while scrolling through social media, I came across something that stopped me in my tracks. Lisa had posted a picture of a brand new red compact SUV, complete with a bow on top. Her caption read something like, "Thank you, Mom and Dad, for the best surprise ever. Love you guys so much." My stomach dropped. This wasn't some second-hand car. It was brand new, with dealer plates and everything. I couldn't decide what hit me harder, the car itself or the flood of memories it triggered. Over the years, Lisa had been showered with things like designer handbags, trips abroad, and even financial help with her rent when she chose to move to a pricey city. Meanwhile, I was the one working extra hours at a fast food job in high school to save for college. I had to figure out student loans on my own. Back then, I didn't feel resentment, or at least I didn't think I did. But seeing that car just days after being told my parents couldn't afford to celebrate my birthday felt like a slap in the face. I sent my mom a text, not accusing her of anything, but simply asking for an explanation. Her reply was curt. Lisa needed it for work. It's not the same as a birthday present. That was all. No further details, no acknowledgement of how it might have come across, and certainly no apology. When I pushed for more clarity, she dismissed me, accusing me of being ungrateful and claiming I didn't know the full story. At that point, I stopped responding. What was the use? Later, I vented to my best friend about everything. He was furious on my behalf, saying I should have confronted my parents right away. But what would that have accomplished? They've always had excuses ready. I could already predict how it would go. They'd twist the narrative to make me seem like the problem, while Lisa played the role of the innocent bystander. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was about more than just the car. It felt like part of a larger pattern, a lifetime of being treated as an afterthought, while Lisa had everything handed to her on a silver platter. For the first time, I began seriously questioning things. Why was I always the one making sacrifices while Lisa got away with everything? Why did my parents think it was acceptable to prioritize her wants over my feelings? Was it because she was younger, more charming, or easier to deal with? Or was I just imagining it? Feeling stuck, I turned to Reddit. like many others in similar situations. I shared my story, trying to keep it factual, and hit post. The response was overwhelming. People shared their own experiences with favoritism and reassured me that my feelings were valid. Some even suggested going low contact with my parents, though that felt too drastic to me. I wasn't ready to sever ties just yet. What I did realize, though, was that I couldn't keep ignoring the problem. Something had to change. Reading the comments, I began feeling a little less isolated. Many people told me this wasn't normal and that I deserved better. And maybe they were right. I wasn't sure what my next step would be, but one thing was clear. I was done pretending everything was fine. If my family refused to take me seriously, maybe it was time to make them. A week after my birthday and the car incident, my parents invited me over for dinner. These family meals happened about once a month, and I usually went, playing along like everything was fine. But this time was different. After reflecting on the Reddit feedback and all the unfairness I'd endured, I decided it was time to stop pretending. If they wanted to have a family dinner, we were going to address how this family really operated. I arrived on time, greeted by the smell of roast chicken and the sound of Lisa's laughter coming from the dining room. After hanging up my jacket, I walked in and froze. Lisa was proudly holding up a keychain with a tiny red car charm, showing it off like a trophy. My parents were beaming, listening to her gush about how well the car drove and how she'd already picked a name for it. The three of them barely noticed me until I sat down. The mood was casual at first. Small talk about work, the weather, and Lisa's new job. She was glowing, talking about how much easier commuting was with the car, and how she couldn't imagine managing without it. My parents chimed in, expressing how proud they were of her and praising her for taking responsibility for her life. The words stung more than I expected, but I stayed quiet, letting the conversation unfold. I waited for the right moment to speak up. That moment came midway through dinner when Lisa leaned back in her chair and mentioned, almost offhandedly, that she was thinking about upgrading the stereo system in the car. I placed my fork down and cleared my throat. So, about the car, I began, doing my best to keep my tone neutral. When you told me you couldn't afford anything for my birthday, was that before or after deciding to buy Lisa a brand new vehicle? The room fell silent. My dad looked up from his plate with raised eyebrows, while my mom's smile faltered. Lisa, of course, didn't hesitate. She leaned forward with a smirk and said, "Well, I needed the car. You don't really need a birthday gift, do you?" My mom quickly jumped in, seemingly trying to calm the situation. She explained that Lisa's old car had broken down, and she required a reliable one for her new job. It wasn't about favoritism, she claimed. It was just about being practical. My dad nodded in agreement, adding that they had done what they believed was best for the family. I wasn't ready to let it go. I pointed out how, for years, Lisa had been getting support in various forms: cars, trips, rent money, while I'd been managing everything alone since I turned 18. College expenses, emergencies, I'd handled all of it without asking for help. Was it really unreasonable to hope for a little recognition on my birthday? That's when the conversation spiraled. My mom accused me of overreacting, saying I was blowing a small issue out of proportion. My dad chimed in, claiming it wasn't a competition and that I should be happy for Lisa. Meanwhile, Lisa twirled her new keychain in her fingers and occasionally tossed in remarks about how jealousy wasn't a good look. I couldn't hold back anymore. I brought up specific examples, like the time they paid for Lisa's spring break trip to Cancun while I worked overtime to afford my textbooks, or how they covered her apartment security deposit while I had to scrape together my own. I wasn't trying to be petty, I just wanted them to recognize the pattern. Instead of hearing me out, they doubled down. My dad accused me of always making things about myself, insisting they had supported me plenty over the years. My mom added that I needed to stop dwelling on the past and focus on my own accomplishments. Lisa couldn't resist adding one final jab, saying maybe I'd get a car too if I weren't so uptight all the time. That was the breaking point. I stood up, thanked them for dinner, and left. I didn't slam the door or shout. I simply walked out. On the drive home, I felt a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't just about the car or my birthday. It was about years of being treated as though I mattered less, and I was done pretending it didn't hurt. When I got home, I called my best friend to tell him everything. He wasn't surprised. He'd witnessed the favoritism over the years and had been urging me to set boundaries for a long time. My boyfriend agreed, telling me I didn't need to keep putting myself in situations where I felt undervalued. The next morning, I woke up to a string of texts from my mom. She apologized if I felt hurt, but insisted that they had done what they thought was fair. She ended the message by saying, "Lisa just needs more help right now, and you're strong enough to handle things on your own." It felt like a backhanded compliment, so I didn't reply. Instead, I updated my Reddit post. The responses were overwhelmingly supportive. Many people shared similar experiences and encouraged me to stand my ground. Some even suggested going low contact or cutting ties completely, though I wasn't sure I was ready for that. For now, I've decided to pull back. I'm limiting contact with my parents and focusing on people who genuinely value me. Still, I can't help but wonder if there's more to this. The favoritism feels too deliberate, too calculated. I'm starting to suspect there's something bigger going on, and I'm determined to find out what it is. A few weeks after the disastrous dinner, I was settling into my decision to limit contact with my parents. I muted the family group chat, ignored occasional texts, and focused on my own life. Then, out of the blue, my cousin Julia called me. Julia and I had always been close, though we didn't talk often, so her reaching out was a surprise. I answered, curious, and she jumped straight to the point. She said she had been following the situation from the sidelines. Apparently, word about the dinner had spread through the extended family. While some relatives thought I was overreacting, others were quietly supportive. Julia firmly fell into the supportive camp. She told me she'd noticed the favoritism toward Lisa for years, even as a kid, and wanted to share something that might explain it. According to Julia, my grandparents had set up a family trust fund years ago. The money was meant to be divided equally between Lisa and me when we turned 18, to help with things like college, a first home, or emergencies. But Julia's mom, my aunt, had heard rumors that my parents had been dipping into the fund for years, using it almost entirely for Lisa's benefit. At first, I didn't know what to say. Julia must have sensed my hesitation because she told me she had proof. She explained that during a family gathering, Lisa had casually mentioned how lucky she was to have parents who always supported her financially. That offhand remark stuck with Julia. Over time, she began piecing together clues from conversations and documents she'd seen at my parents' house. Out of curiosity, she started digging deeper and eventually found messages between my parents discussing large withdrawals from the trust fund, all for Lisa. Julia sent me screenshots of what she'd found. The messages detailed payments for Lisa's rent, her trips, and even the car. Seeing it in writing made it undeniable. My parents had been using the money meant for both of us to fund Lisa's lifestyle, while I had been struggling on my own. I thanked Julia for telling me and spent the next day combing through every document and email I could find from my parents. I remembered signing something when I was younger about the trust, but I hadn't paid much attention at the time. Now I regretted not being more careful. The next day, I contacted a lawyer for advice. She explained that if the trust was meant to be divided equally, my parents couldn't legally favor one sibling over the other. She recommended gathering as much evidence as possible to build a case. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Things escalated quickly after that. Somehow, Lisa found out I was looking into the trust. She called me, furious, accusing me of being selfish and trying to take what was hers. She threw in a few cutting remarks about how I'd always been jealous of her, couldn't handle her success, and was grasping at straws to make myself feel important. I didn't argue with her. I simply hung up. Not long after, my parents reached out. At first, they pretended to be clueless, claiming I must have misunderstood the situation. When I refused to relent, they changed their tone, accusing me of trying to destroy the family over material possessions. My dad even went as far as to call me ungrateful, insisting they had sacrificed a lot for me over the years. Unfortunately for them, the findings from the lawyer didn't back up their claims. After examining the trust documents and the messages Julia had shared, she confirmed my parents had blatantly mishandled the funds. Not only had they consistently favored Lisa, but they had also used some of the money for their own personal expenses. It was worse than I'd imagined. I updated my Reddit post with everything I'd uncovered up to that point. The response was overwhelming. People were appalled by my parents' actions, labeling them as toxic manipulators and encouraging me to pursue legal action. Many shared similar stories of favoritism, and their support gave me the push I needed to continue. Meanwhile, my parents escalated their guilt-tripping. They left lengthy voicemails expressing their disappointment in me, accusing me of ruining Christmas by creating unnecessary drama, and insisting they had only ever done what was best for the family. True to form, Lisa doubled down on social media, posting cryptic quotes about betrayal and snakes in the grass. Throughout all of this, I held firm. I began therapy, not just to deal with the current situation, but to process the years of resentment I had been carrying. For the first time, I started to see the profound emotional toll my parents' favoritism had taken on me. Beyond just the financial impacts, the support from Julia and a few other relatives made a huge difference. One of my uncles even reached out, offering help in any way he could. He shared that he had dealt with his own issues with my parents in the past and wasn't surprised by what I had uncovered. Knowing I wasn't alone gave me the strength to keep going. As for my parents, they continued trying to manipulate the narrative to make themselves look innocent, but cracks were starting to form. More family members were finding out the truth about what they had done, and the tide was slowly turning. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had control over the situation, and I had a feeling this was only the beginning. A week after my discussion with the lawyer and my deep dive into the trust fund, things hit a new low. Julia sent me a text with a link to one of Lisa's social media posts. I opened it and felt my stomach drop. Lisa had listed the car my parents had just gifted her for sale, captioning it with something like, "Selling my baby to fund the vacation of my dreams. Message me if interested." I was stunned. The car was supposed to be essential for her job, but now she was trying to cash in on it for a luxury vacation. It felt like another slap in the face. I immediately saved the post and forwarded it to my lawyer, along with screenshots of the conversations about the trust fund. She reminded me to keep everything as evidence and let the legal process take its course. But I wasn't done. I decided it was time to stop playing nice. I began contacting extended family, sharing what I had discovered about the trust fund and how my parents had been misusing it. Most relatives were shocked, especially when I told them about the car and Lisa's plans to sell it. A few admitted they had noticed the favoritism over the years, but had avoided getting involved. Now that everything was out in the open, they were furious. Not everyone supported me, though. A handful of relatives accused me of making too much of the situation, saying I should let it go and focus on my own success. They argued that the trust fund wasn't worth tearing the family apart over. My parents, predictably, doubled down when they heard I had been talking to the rest of the family. They called me, accusing me of trying to humiliate them. My dad even tried to guilt trip me, saying I was ruining Lisa's reputation and would regret it when I realized how important family was. Lisa took a different route. She began posting vague messages on social media about toxic people and jealousy ruining relationships. She even shared a story about a supposed friend who couldn't handle seeing others happy, clearly trying to paint herself as the victim. Mutual friends and acquaintances started reaching out, asking me what was going on. I stuck to the facts, letting them decide for themselves. Through all of this, therapy became my anchor. My therapist helped me unpack the years of favoritism and the ways my parents' behavior had affected my relationship with them and with myself. She pointed out that this wasn't just about Lisa, it was about control. By favoring Lisa and forcing me to fend for myself, they had kept me at a distance while ensuring Lisa remained dependent on them. Breaking this cycle meant standing my ground, no matter how uncomfortable it became. The next major blow came when my parents gave me an ultimatum. They called again, this time with a clear message. If I didn't drop the legal inquiry into the trust fund, they would cut me out of the family completely. They claimed I was tearing the family apart over money and accused me of being greedy and ungrateful. I listened without interrupting, then calmly told them I wasn't backing down. If they chose to cut me off, that was their decision. But I wasn't going to let them intimidate me into silence. That choice wasn't easy, but it felt right. My boyfriend was incredibly supportive, reminding me that I didn't have to endure toxic behavior just because it came from family. He even suggested that going no contact might be the healthiest option in the long run. I wasn't sure I was ready for that, but knowing he was in my corner made all the difference. I updated my Reddit post again, sharing the latest developments. The responses were overwhelmingly positive. People called me brave for challenging a toxic family dynamic and encouraged me to keep fighting for what was right. Many shared their own stories of favoritism and betrayal, and their encouragement gave me the strength to move forward. With my lawyer's help, I officially filed a claim regarding the trust fund. This wasn't just about money. It was about holding my parents accountable. Predictably, Lisa didn't take the news well. She began spreading falsehoods to mutual friends and family, accusing me of making things up and trying to ruin her life. Some people believed her, but many didn't. The evidence was clear, and the more she lashed out, the worse she appeared. The extended family remained divided. Some were horrified by my parents' actions and stood by me, while others stayed silent or sided with my parents. The divide was growing, and it was obvious there was no going back to how things had been before. Then, just when I thought I had seen everything, I received a letter in the mail. It was from my parents' lawyer, outlining their intention to countersue me for defamation and emotional distress. My lawyer wasn't worried. She assured me their case held no weight, but the letter made it clear that things were about to escalate significantly. This was far from over. Not long after receiving the threat of a countersuit from my parents' attorney, I sat down with my own lawyer to discuss our next steps. She wasn't concerned about their claims. It's just a scare tactic, she explained, outlining their likely goal: to pressure me into dropping my investigation into the trust fund. She reassured me that my case was solid and advised doubling down on uncovering the financial details. Meanwhile, Lisa kept herself busy online, posting yet another cryptic message on social media. It was about snakes in the grass and how some people can't handle seeing others happy. She even shared a dramatic story about family betrayal, paired with a glamorous selfie in her new designer sunglasses. It was obvious she was stirring up drama, and it worked. Mutual friends started reaching out to ask for my side of the story. I kept my responses brief, sticking strictly to the facts. One of my aunts contacted me next, offering to mediate between me and my parents. She felt that the situation had spiraled out of control and wanted to help us find common ground. While I appreciated her intentions, I declined. Mediation was pointless when my parents refused to admit their actions. The money wasn't the only issue. It was years of blatant favoritism and manipulation. My lawyer and I pushed ahead with the financial audit. The findings confirmed what I had suspected. My parents had funneled a significant portion of the trust fund to Lisa over the years, and had also spent some of the money on personal luxuries. One large withdrawal had been used for a high-end kitchen remodel, while another had paid for a European vacation my parents had taken years ago, which they had claimed was a gift from a friend. The mounting evidence was damning. When I shared the audit results in my latest Reddit update, the responses were overwhelming. People were outraged on my behalf, with many suggesting I involve law enforcement. Some pointed out that this could qualify as fraud, depending on how the trust was structured. Others urged me to stay strong and not let my parents intimidate me. Their support kept me grounded as the chaos around me grew. Around this time, my parents began to panic. They started calling and texting me constantly, alternating between half-hearted apologies and veiled threats. My mom left a voicemail saying they were open to talking if I was willing to put this behind us. My dad sent a long text accusing me of tearing the family apart and urging me to consider the bigger picture. Neither of them acknowledged any wrongdoing. They just wanted me to drop the case. I didn't respond. My lawyer advised that all future communication go through legal channels, and I agreed. I informed my parents that I wouldn't consider reconciliation until they fully admitted their actions and returned the money they had taken. Unsurprisingly, they didn't take that well. Lisa, of course, couldn't resist fanning the flames. She made another public post, this time directly referencing me. "You can try all you want, but you'll never get a dime. Mom and Dad love me more anyway." I saved the post and sent it to my lawyer. It wasn't just petty. It was more proof of her entitlement and my parents' clear favoritism. Despite everything, therapy was helping. I was beginning to recognize the patterns in my parents' behavior and how their favoritism had shaped my self-esteem over the years. Breaking that cycle wasn't easy, but I was committed to the process. My therapist reminded me that setting boundaries wasn't selfish. It was necessary. As more extended family members learned about the trust fund debacle, the divide grew deeper. Several cousins reached out to express their support, admitting they had always suspected my parents favored Lisa, but hadn't realized the extent of it. Others stayed silent, likely unsure which side to take. My parents had spent years crafting a perfect family image, and now it was falling apart. Then, the story spread beyond the family. A mutual friend posted a vague comment about parents playing favorites and getting exposed. It didn't take long for people to connect the dots. Suddenly, I was getting messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, asking if the rumors were true. I stuck to the facts, refusing to badmouth anyone, but my parents' carefully curated image was in tatters. Amid the chaos, an unexpected ally emerged. My uncle. Someone I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, sharing that he had experienced similar treatment from my parents when they were younger. He described them as controlling and dismissive, and said he wasn't surprised they had treated me this way. He offered both emotional and financial support, which I gratefully accepted. Knowing someone else had been through this made me feel less alone. Just when I thought nothing could shock me anymore, my lawyer called with a bombshell. During the audit, she had uncovered a significant asset, a piece of property that should have been in my name, but had been illegally transferred to Lisa years ago. It was clear my parents had gone to great lengths to prioritize her, even at my expense. This revelation changed everything. The stakes were higher now, and I was more determined than ever to see this through. The court date finally arrived, and although I thought I was prepared, stepping into the courtroom made everything feel real in a way it hadn't before. My lawyer was confident. armed with a mountain of evidence, bank statements, emails, and trust documents that painted a clear picture of my parents' actions. Across the room, my parents sat stiffly, whispering to each other. Lisa was there too, scrolling through her phone as if none of this mattered. The first day was mostly procedural, setting the stage and outlining the case. Things didn't heat up until the second day, when Lisa was called to testify. Her performance was something to behold. She claimed she had no idea the funds had been misused, insisting she thought all the money she received was just gifts from generous parents who wanted to see her succeed. She tried to frame herself as a victim of the situation, talking about how difficult her life had been. My lawyer wasn't having it. She presented text messages between Lisa and my parents, discussing the trust fund and how they planned to use it. One message even mentioned transferring the property into Lisa's name because she needed it more. As the messages were read aloud, Lisa's face turned bright red. She stumbled through her answers, trying to deflect blame, but the damage was done. Next, my parents took the stand. They stuck to their narrative, claiming the funds were used in the best interests of the family. They downplayed the favoritism, insisting they had supported me in other ways over the years. But my lawyer was ready. She showed receipts for the kitchen renovation and European vacation, directly tying the funds to personal luxuries. She also highlighted the stark lack of similar financial support for me. The turning point came when my lawyer presented the evidence of the illegally transferred property. She laid out a timeline showing how it had originally been in my name before being quietly shifted to Lisa without my knowledge. The judge's disapproval was evident, especially when my parents tried to dismiss it as a misunderstanding. By the third day, word of the trial had spread. A few acquaintances who had once been close to my parents showed up to watch. Their expressions were a mix of shock and disappointment as the evidence piled up. My parents' carefully maintained image of a supportive family was collapsing. Midway through the proceedings, my parents' lawyer approached mine with a settlement offer. They were willing to return a portion of the funds if I agreed to drop the case. The offer was insultingly low, with no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. I rejected it without hesitation. The trial concluded with my lawyer delivering a powerful closing argument. She summarized the years of favoritism, the misuse of funds, and the blatant disregard for the trust's terms, leaving no room for doubt. The verdict came quickly. The court ruled in my favor, awarding me a substantial portion of the misused funds and ownership of the illegally transferred property. The judge made it clear my parents had acted in bad faith. While no criminal charges were filed, their reputation was in ruins. Lisa, predictably, didn't handle it well. Within hours of the verdict, she posted a long rant on social media, claiming I had ruined her life and betrayed the family. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents, however, went silent. No calls, no texts, no explanations. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had the upper hand, and I wasn't about to let it go. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding relationships with family members who had supported me. Julia and I became closer than ever, and my uncle, who had stood by me, helped me navigate the next steps with the property and funds. Therapy became a cornerstone of my healing. For years, I had craved my parents' approval, but now I was learning to let that go. The biggest surprise came from my boyfriend. One quiet evening after dinner, he proposed. He told me he admired my strength and couldn't imagine life without me. It was the happiest moment I'd had in years and felt like the start of something new and better. Shortly after, I made the final break with my parents. I blocked them and Lisa on all platforms and informed mutual friends and relatives that I wasn't interested in reconciliation. This wasn't about holding a grudge. It was about protecting myself from people who had shown, time and again, that they didn't have my best interests at heart. I shared my final update on Reddit, and the response was incredible. Thousands of people commented, praising my strength and determination. Many shared their own family struggles and thanked me for showing them it was okay to stand up for yourself, even against your own family. Looking back, I'm proud of how far I've come. The journey was tough, but it was worth it. For the first time, I feel free. Free to live my life on my own terms, without the weight of my family's toxicity holding me back. This is my closure, and I'm ready for whatever comes next.